Welcome to the NAIFA webinar series, providing you with timely information and training each month on topics of interest. This is Brendan Burnett, Director, Professional Development and Education Programs, and this month we are presenting the College Funding Conundrum, Back to School, 529 Plans and 529 Plan Alternatives. For millions of American families, paying for college, or even the thought of paying for college, presents a conundrum. This is due in part to the fact that many families are unclear regarding the rules for financial aid. Today during the webinar, you will learn how to maximize both need-based and merit-based financial aid, the common financial aid formulas, historical college savings instruments, and resources and tools available to the advisor. And you'll learn about the financial aid process, college funding related problems, and strategies for solving these problems for families. With me today is Brock Jolly. Brock is a financial advisor who specializes in working with families of college-bound students to identify, develop, and implement strategies for saving and paying for college as part of a comprehensive financial plan. Since 2002, he has taught his workshop, Little Known Secrets of Paying for College, to parents through adult education programs, schools, community organizations, places of worship, and businesses. This class has been taught thousands of times and in 24 states. And Brock is now also the NAIFA Treasurer. During the presentation and question and answer session, you may type questions in the question box on the right side of your screen. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the program. And this webinar is being recorded. And this is now a special message to those NAIFA members from the Commonwealth of Virginia who are participating in the webinar today. In order for you to receive CE credits for your participation, you must view a handout. This handout can be viewed in the handout pane on the right side of your screen. So I ask everyone in Virginia to please take a moment, click on the Handouts tab, and view the handout that has been uploaded. So let's begin. Brock, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Brendan. Are we on?
We're on.
All right.
We're live.
Perfect. All right. Only in Virginia would they make you, do an extra step. So, what we want to do today is really go over some of the basics around college funding and then dive a little bit deeper as well. I want to talk about some of the concepts that I think are critical to know, things like cost of attendance, historical college savings vehicles, some of the strategies that families have employed over the years to both save and pay, and looking at things like using your income, using assets, borrowing money, either in the form of traditional college loans or borrowing money from places where many families have equity stored up. And then my favorite kind, which is other people's money. We're going to talk a little bit about what's called the expected family contribution, which is the formula utilized to determine need-based aid eligibility, and ways that you might be able to help clients to maximize their need-based aid eligibility. We're going to talk about how to create liquidity and cash flow for those families that, especially those who will not qualify for need-based aid. And then my public service announcement of, just trying to avoid some of the unethical behaviors that exist out there in the marketplace. So with that, let's dive in. As Brendan said, I've been in the financial planning industry since about 2000. And the way I always start is, think about the world of financial planning in 1999 or 2000, that sort of time frame. Basically, the way I always describe it is untrained monkeys were throwing darts at dartboards and making money for people. Anything that had a .com in it was going exponentially higher and higher and higher. And then I got into the financial planning industry. And what happened? The bottom of the market fell out. And I'm always quick to explain to people that that was not entirely my fault. But the reality is I kept getting questions from people about how in the world they were going to pay for their children's college education. And my honest answer early on was I didn't know, but certainly I had plenty of time on my hands. I had lots of time to research this. And what I figured out was a couple of things. I figured out, number one, most financial advisors didn't really understand the ins and outs of how financial aid really works. In other words, if you think of it today, probably either you or folks in your office, when they get asked, how am I going to save or pay for my children's college education, the answer is, well, you should fund a Section 529 plan. And the thing I always explain to people, I love 529 plans. I think they're a great and wonderful tool, but they're just that. They're a tool. They're not necessarily a strategy. And so understanding how to build a conversation around strategic financial planning centered around college is really what I've now ultimately built a career around, because what I figured out is how to answer some of these questions and some of the strategies that are out there. I eventually started teaching a class through an adult education program in my hometown in 2002. Like Brendan said, we've now expanded that. We've got close to 100 advisors around the country who are part of the College Funding Coach program and who basically have utilized our program to be able to go in and do presentations at schools and businesses and churches and community organizations, you name it, to be able to do college funding sort of as the door opener for comprehensive planning. So the question is, why college funding? The feedback that I get from advisors all the time is they think sort of along those lines. They think, well, I don't really do much college funding specifically. I don't think it's a good niche because, you think about it, somebody's putting 50, 100, 250, 1,000, whatever the number is, dollars per month into a Section 529 plan. And then lo and behold, their little rugrats go off to college and they pull all the money out of their 529 plans, leaving you as the advisor with little to show for maybe 10, 15, even 20 years worth of effort. And I don't disagree with that, but I think oftentimes those advisors are sort of missing the forest for the trees. Because the reality is there have been numerous studies done. The most recent I saw was from Fidelity that said that college funding is actually the number one financial fear of most American families, right? Meaning, I always describe it this way, and that is, if you go up to a prospective client and you say, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, I think you ought to save more money for retirement. They probably know that. They're probably well aware that they could do a better job of saving for retirement, but they also know that they'd love to take that next family vacation or buy the big screen TV or the Tesla or whatever it is that they need to buy that's way more important than saving for retirement. If you say, you need to, I just met this morning, with a gentleman. His income last year was $840,000, and he has $500,000 of group term life insurance. And to him, it was unfathomable that he could possibly need more life insurance. And I think it's just, people don't want to think about it. To them, life insurance means dying, and nobody wants to think about that. And so, to me, though, people are passionate about their children, right? Either because we want to launch our children off into the world, give them a better head start maybe than we had, or I would say, or just simply get them off the family payroll. It is a big motivation for families. And the reality is less than 3% of financial advisors truly focus on college funding. And so it's been a great opportunity for us. And the last thing I'll say on that is that, most financial advisors, certainly those in the wealth management space, really focus on the folks in the retirement red zone, kind of that age 60 to 70, right around retirement, that have the big rollovers that, you can roll over and manage and get paid based upon the assets under management. For me, my goal has always been to get that same 60 to 70-year-old, but get them when they are 40 to 50, right? Get them when they've got younger kids, make them a client, build up the trust, build the rapport, have a long-lasting relationship with them so that when they become the 68-year-old retiree, we are the logical choice. The thing that I found too, sort of the second thing in this analysis that I was doing way back in 2000 is that for most families, their money was in two places. And I would submit to you, think about the majority of your clients who are sort of your run-of-the-mill families, right? Maybe they don't own a business. They're not multimillionaires. They're just, sort of maybe the millionaire next door kind of thing, right? They've got good money. They make good money. But the reality is most of their money is in the equity in their home and in their retirement plans, which is great for retirement. It's not so great when you need to send 1 or 2 or 3 or 7 kids to college, right? You need liquidity, you need cash flow. And the other thing is that for most families, college is sort of that last big hurdle before retirement. And so when I do these workshops around the country, and our team does about 400 of these workshops a year, the question that we always ask is, how many of you here have a goal of one day being able to retire? And after a little bit of a nervous chuckle, they say, yeah, we want to retire one day. And I always explain college gets in the way of your ability to retire. Right? I'm not suggesting that it's not a good idea to send your kids to college. What I am suggesting is that if you've got a goal of sending your kids to college and retiring, sometimes from a planning perspective, those strategies are mutually exclusive. And so we want to develop strategies that will work for you and allow you to make the college dream a reality and still retire one day. And, it's interesting. I saw maybe about a decade ago now, but this commercial was on television, and it was something like this. And I think it's very representative of the way it is for most of our families.
I got into one of the best schools in the country. I got into one of the most expensive schools in the country.
When stress gives you heartburn with headache, Alka-Seltzer gives you relief fast. Blop, blop, skip, skip.
So just in case you couldn't hear it, girl walks in, dad's eating the sandwich in the kitchen. She exclaims to her mother, I got into one of the best schools in the country. And the way dad interprets that, his hearing is, I got into one of the most expensive schools in the country. And the reality is we want our kids to go to great schools, but the challenge is that those great schools are really expensive. I mean, even when you talk about an in-state public school, you're talking about something somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000. And we'll talk more about that here in just a second. The ultimate college goal really for the family, for the student, is to select the right college. The thing I always explain is fit. Finding the right fit is so vitally important. Meaning, we've had, again, we've been teaching this class now for 16 years. And we've had lots of families that have sent their children to what I would classify as the wrong school. Not because it's a bad school, but because it's the wrong fit for that particular child, right? You get families that say, my kid can go to any school they want as long as it's an in-state public school. You get kids who say, I'm going to go to this school because they've got a great football program, or it's where my boyfriend or girlfriend or brother or sister goes to school. And oftentimes what that leads to is you get students who go to a school, they end up dropping out, transferring, changing majors, all of which leads to higher costs of attendance. And then number two is you want to make sure that they graduate in 4 years with a career. I've seen lots of different studies on this, but probably the most conclusive I've seen says that the average student takes between 5 and 6 years to graduate from college. So think about that. If we can figure out ways to get them out closer to 4, that's a really good thing and will help them to save money along the line. For the parents, we want to make sure that we're paying with cost-efficient dollars. And I mean a lot of things by that, but most notably, we want to make sure that we're minimizing taxes, minimizing your college expenses and increasing financial aid, maximizing the efficiency of your money. And by that, I just mean sort of finding those leaks, wastes, and inefficiencies in the financial plan. And if we can recapture those dollars and redeploy them elsewhere, in my book, that's a really good thing. And then lastly, minimize lost opportunity costs. Now, I've got a lot of financial advisors and insurance agents on the phone. I'm quite certain that you can all define that term, lost opportunity costs. That's one of the games that I play at our workshops. I say, who took a high school or a college economics class and wants to define for us the term lost opportunity costs? And all the hands go down. The way I describe it is this: if I spend $1 today, then not only do I not have that dollar in the future, but I also don't have what that dollar could have grown to. So what I explain is that from a purely economic perspective, college is a lost opportunity cost. Again, not that it's not a noble objective. It is. And we want to educate our kids, but it gets in the way of a parent's ability to retire. The first term with which to familiarize yourself is what's called cost of attendance. And your cost of attendance is your cost all in. So by that, I mean tuition, room and board, books, computers, supplies, etc. So for a public in-state university, and these are last year's numbers, by the way, 2017, 2018 school year. The new official numbers have not come out yet. But at a public school, about $25,290. By the way, that's not, I'm in Virginia. That's not a Virginia number. That's a national number. For private schools, it's roughly double that. And for the elite and the Ivy League schools, it's $70,000 on up. We've got a student right now who's at New York University, and the cost of attendance there is $79,830. That's a lot of money, right? And how do you do it? Well, when we talk about that type of money, the reality is, and I always reference, there's a book out there called 1,001 Ways to Pay for College. It's a little bit of a misnomer because at the end of the day, it really boils down to four primary ways of paying for college. Either a family will use their current income, right? Meaning, look, there's lots of families and probably many clients of ours who can simply stroke the check, and that's a really good problem to have. But oftentimes I hear families who say, well, I'm going to stop funding my retirement, right? I've been putting $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year aside for retirement, and by the time my kids go to college, I should have plenty of money saved up for retirement. Well, I would submit to you that that's probably not an ideal way to plan for college and retirement simultaneously. Secondly, families use their savings or their investments. We'll talk about that in a second. Thirdly, they borrow the money, either in the form of traditional college loans. Just a little plug here is that NAIFA has a great partnership with Sallie Mae that allows you to provide student loans to your clients through Sallie Mae. If you've never used it, it's an awesome program. I'd highly recommend it. Something to take a look at. It's one of your value-added benefits of being a NAIFA member. Secondly, where do most families have most of their money? It's either in their home or in their retirement plans. Now, I would tell you with interest rates where they are right now, borrowing the equity out of your home may not be a terrible, awful strategy, right? Because you might be able to borrow the money at something like 4 or 4.5%. But what I would tell you is let history be a lesson for us. And by that, I mean, we've seen lots of families over the last decade or so that did sort of use their home like a bank and pulled equity out and used it for various objectives, and only to later have their homes foreclosed upon or run into cash flow problems and that type of thing. And so I always tell families, create a strategy to repay yourself. Or we see families who borrow money out of their retirement plans, right? And the message that I always hear, and you probably do as well, is families say, well, I can borrow the money out of my retirement plan at 3.5%. And the math is right, but what gets lost in that equation is the fact that when you borrow the money out, you're paying it back with after-tax dollars. You're paying it back with interest. And then hopefully the money's going to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then one day, lo and behold, you're actually able to retire. And then on the back end, you pull the money out of your retirement plan, and what do you have to do? You have to pay taxes. So now, in effect, you've got dollars that are after-tax dollars on which you're paying tax all over again. So again, obviously, I'm sort of streamlining that. There's a lot of moving parts to that. But the point is, it may not be the most efficient way to pay for your children's college education and still retire one day. And lastly is my favorite type of money, and that's what I call other people's money, meaning scholarships, grants, and the like. And I could do a whole session on scholarships and grants. We'll talk a little bit more about it later, but certainly good value-added tools for you to be aware of that I think you can really add a lot of insight and value in conversations with clients. So if you said, well, Brock, I'm going to use my income. Remember that college, like most things, is paid for with after-tax dollars. Meaning, if you're talking about an in-state public school, and let's say that you're in the 25% federal income tax bracket, that means that you actually have to earn roughly $135,000, pay the taxes, and then have the money to send to the college or university. If you're in a 35% federal income tax bracket, which currently is the highest bracket, then you've got to earn $430,000 before paying for an Ivy League education. If you said, well, I did a good job of saving, we saved up some money, we're going to be able to use our assets to pay for college. I think that's great. It's a good problem to have, but it really is that principle of lost opportunity cost, meaning if I spend the dollars on college, then I don't have them for retirement. So if we're talking about a public school and you spend that $25,290 from the prior slide, that means that 10 years from now, if you could have earned 8% on your money, it's over $218,000 that you do not have at retirement. If you're talking about the Ivy League schools, again, it's roughly $70,000 per year. And if you had 20 years until retirement, during which you could earn 8% per year, That's over $1.3 million that you do not have at retirement. Now let me just twist the knife slightly, and that is to say per child, right? So if you're working with a family that's got 3 kids, just do the math on that. That's a lot of money. And so the key on this, I had a parent who came up to me last year during one of our workshops, or just after one of our workshops, and he said, Brock, my workshop, by the way, is called Little Known Secrets of Paying for College. And he said, Brock, I came here because I wanted to learn the little known secrets. And he said, the best secret that I learned is this. If you do it right, it's not about paying for college. It's about not paying for college. And what he meant by that, I was like, that's pretty good insight, because what he meant by that was, if you can use other people's money, if you can make your money work harder, smarter, faster. See, we're all guilty, our industry is guilty of teaching clients how to plan linearly, meaning this is my college fund, this is the retirement fund, this is the vacation fund, this is the new house fund. And the more you can really plan comprehensively and have those dollars really working for you, I think the more success you'll have over time. And we'll talk about some of those strategies as we go today. Historical college savings vehicles. Now, truth be told, I could probably do an hour-long webinar on this slide alone. Because you're a group of financial advisors, I don't think that I need to educate you about each and every one of these bullet points. But what I will say is that there are advantages and disadvantages to every single financial instrument out there. And the key is to understand and explain those advantages and disadvantages and find the products and the strategies that will make the most sense for your clients. So as an example, UGMAs and UTMAs, we don't see too much of those these days, but they certainly are still out there. The big red flag in my mind is that when the child turns 18, that's their money. If they want to take that money and they want to go jump on a Harley Davidson and cruise out west and, live in Los Angeles and, live in a tree or something like that. I don't know what kids do these days. They can do it. It's their money. Number 2, it is taxable at the child's rate. And number 3, it does count against the child in the financial aid formula as their money. You'll understand why that's important here in a little bit. Again, I won't read all of these to you, but loans, grants, and scholarships, that could be a whole presentation. What I will tell you is with regard to loans, buyer beware, because a lot of times the schools will provide a student loan program that's at a pretty exorbitant interest rate. And if a family simply takes some time to investigate their options, especially if they're in a really good, if they've got really good credit scores, then it's very valuable to shop around a little bit. With regard to scholarships, lots and lots and lots of opportunities out there. What I will tell you is it's never too early to start planning for scholarships. Think about your situation. Were you ever a second semester high school senior? I think most of you on this call probably were. And imagine how motivated you were in your second semester of your senior year of high school to go out and apply for scholarships. And that's when most families are applying for scholarships. You can start early. There are lots of scholarships out there for students that are sophomores, juniors. They'll be then used once they go off to college, but help your families to start searching for those opportunities. I already talked about borrowing against retirement plans and leveraging home equity. Cash value life insurance, I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but obviously for the majority of our clients and prospects, they don't understand cash value life insurance and how it can be used while they're alive. For most families, when they think of life insurance, they think of 2 things. And do this very scientific survey next time you're in front of a group of prospective clients. So when you think of life insurance, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And then give it a second, and somebody's going to say death. And I say, number 2, how do you keep a life insurance policy in force? And most people will think for a second and say, well, number 1, you got to stay alive, which is true. But number 2 is you got to pay a premium. So which one's more fun? A premium that you've got to pay every month or every year, or a death benefit that's going to be around for somebody else after you die? And that's just about the extent of how most people think of their life insurance. So most families have never taken the time, and shame on us, most advisors haven't done a good job of explaining to them how they might be able to use and spend and enjoy that money while they're alive. Post 9/11 GI Bill for military families that will pay for education at an in-state public school. And then Section 529, college savings vehicles. So there's two different varieties. One is the prepaid variety, which basically guarantees tuition when your child goes off to an in-state public school, broadly speaking, or savings variety plans where you save money with the American Funds or Fidelity or Oppenheimer or whomever else and save that money on a tax advantage basis to be used for college. The advantage to the savings variety plans is that money, in addition to tuition, can also be used for room and board, books, computers, supplies, etc. So my question for you is, what is the best way to pay for a college education? And always on this slide, somebody will ask me sort of the silver bullet question. That's like, okay, you've got these, 8 or 10 different ways of paying for college. Which one's the best? And the reality is there isn't a best. There's lots of different ways, and there's probably myriad other ways that are not included on this slide. But the reality is we want to figure out the best strategy for our client's family. And it could be one or a combination of these or some things that are not even on this. I mean, I've had lots of families who have purchased real estate, which I think that's a perfectly fine way of paying for college. Advantages and disadvantages again, but it's a strategy. And so to me, the best way to pay for college, which I said earlier, is OPM, other people's money. And so the way I describe that is this. Every single college and university has what is called an endowment. And the endowment is money that can be used to build buildings, to endow professorships, and most importantly for you and your clients, to attract and retain really talented students. So at the top of this list is a little tiny school up near Boston called Harvard. Harvard has roughly $36 billion in their endowment. Now, the cost of attendance at Harvard is roughly $70,000 per year. Now, with $36 billion in an endowment, Harvard could cover the cost of attendance for every single one of their students in perpetuity. Yet, Harvard charges $70,000 per year. And my question for you is, why? Well, you think about it, usually some wise soul in my audience will say, because they can, right? Because Harvard knows that they've got the name that has the gravitas that people will pay for it. They know that, look, if you're willing to pay $70,000 a year in order to get that crimson bumper sticker on the back of your Honda Odyssey, they'll take it. But if you can't pay $70,000 per year, then they've got $36 billion in their endowment. And they'll provide benefits. And that's how schools like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and schools like Michigan and Texas, Notre Dame continue to attract the best and the brightest students, not only in the United States, but around the world. Because they've got these large endowments that, and they're schools that have money and that give money. Further on down the list, so I always use Indiana University as the example because I grew up in Indiana. And Indiana University has roughly 40,000 students, undergrad and graduate. And they've got $2 billion in their endowment. Now, behind them is a little tiny school called Grinnell College. And most of you on this call have probably never heard of Grinnell College. Grinnell is a little tiny school in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Iowa, which my apologies to all of my friends in Iowa, but I realize that is a fairly redundant statement. And I can say that because I was born in Iowa. But Grinnell has about $1.7 billion in their endowment. Now, I told you that Indiana University has $40,000 and 40,000 students, and they've got $2 billion in their endowment. Grinnell has $1.7 billion, but does anybody have any idea how many students they have? According to their website, this year they have 1,712 students. So the question is, do you think you can spread roughly $2 billion more among 40,000 students or 1,700 students? And there are schools like Grinnell that not only have money, but that give money. And I always say I'm not here making a public service announcement for Grinnell. What I'm here to do is to have you understand the concept and to help you to find your Grinnell. Help your clients, especially if they're eligible for need-based aid, help them to figure out the strategies where they can not only get money, but the schools that will give money is critically important. So how do they get it? How do they get their hands on this aid? Well, every single college and university requires a form called the FAFSA. That stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It asks about 4 primary things. It asks about students' income, students' assets, parents' income, and parents' assets. And I'll walk you through the formula here in just a second. There are also approximately 229 schools that require a form called the CSS profile. CSS is offered by the or provided by the college scholarships. It's called the College Scholarship Service. It's provided by the College Board. They dig a little bit deeper. So they're going to ask questions that aren't covered by the FAFSA. Things like, tell me about your non-custodial parent, meaning in situations of divorce. One parent is considered the custodial parent, one is not. They may want to know about the non-custodial parent, any support they're providing, what their income is, that type of thing. They may want to know about home equity or money that you have inside of cash value, inside of your life insurance and annuities. All questions that the FAFSA does not touch. Okay. Then in addition, some schools also have their own institutional forms, which asks CSS profile style questions. Now, I talked early on about what I call the cost of attendance. And again, the cost of attendance is the cost of that college or university all in. The second term with which to familiarize yourself is what's called the expected family contribution. And the expected family contribution is the amount that they expect your family to pay on an annual basis. And again, I'm going to walk you through that formula here in just a second. The cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution is the family's financial need. What that means is that is the amount for which you are eligible. Does not mean that that's the amount that you're going to get, right? So that's sort of your starting point. And so we'll go through this in a little more detail with a real live case study as an example. Before I dive into the formula, it's also important to understand that some things count in the formula and some things do not count. So in terms of assets, I know you can read this, but I'll read it through very quickly with you. Assets are things that you can easily get your hands on. Things like your bank accounts, your non-qualified investments, 529 plans, which, by the way, always count as a parental asset, regardless of who actually owns it. The UGMA and UTMA, which always count as a child's asset. If you own a business, here's the catch, with over 100 employees, it counts. And if you have investment property, right, a rental property or a beach house or something along those lines, it counts. In terms of income, again, pretty straightforward. Wages, rental income, business income, interest, dividends, child support, Social Security, welfare. And the one that always jumps out to people, and that is your current retirement plan contribution. So in other words, if you've got a client who's putting $10,000 a year, $15,000 a year into their 401k, 403b, government thrift savings plan, whatever it may be, it comes back into the equation. The way the Department of Education looks at this is you do not need to continue saving for your retirement. You do need to pay for your child's college education. Don't shoot the messenger. Now, the good news is that money that's already inside of your retirement plans doesn't count. So money, you could have $1 million inside of your retirement plan, and at the majority of schools, it would not count. In addition, equity in your primary residence doesn't count. Money inside of cash value life insurance or annuities doesn't count. Household items don't count. So, go recommend to clients that they buy a Ferrari, stick it in the garage, because it will help them to save money on the cost of college. I'm kidding a little bit on that. But also things like artwork, baseball card collections, anything along those lines would not count. But by the same token, personal debt doesn't count. So in other words, if a family's got $100,000 in their bank account and they owe $30,000 on the credit card, they count the $100,000, they ignore the $30,000 of debt. So if ever there was a good time to pay off the debt, this is probably it. And then finally, with regard to income, financial aid, food stamps, pension rollovers, and any loans do not count against you in the formula. Now it's my time to really get into the weeds and nerd out with you a little bit. And the reason I do this, and I do this at the workshop, and I sort of describe it the same way. Now, I think we've got people who, on this call, who hopefully are a little more attuned to this and maybe are a little bit more numbers people. But I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not analytical, right? Anybody who's met me can probably tell you that. I can play analytical, but I'm really not. I'm more of a concept person. I'm more of a strategic planner. But I want to make sure that our families, and certainly all of you on the call today, understand this and understand how the watch gets made a little bit. And what I mean by that is we're going to walk into the EFC formula. And what I will tell you is there are plenty of online calculators. We're actually in the process of totally gutting our website. We're going to have our own expected family contribution calculator on the website. But there are plenty of online resources where you can calculate your expected family contribution. You don't need to know exactly how this comes together. What I will tell you is if you really want to nerd out on it, just do a quick Google search for EFC Formula 2019. What you will find is the expected family contribution formula for next school year. It's already been published. And the idea is that families can start completing that document. If they've got a senior in high school right now, or a freshman, junior, or senior in college, I missed a grade. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in college, someone who is going back for another year of school, they can start filling out that FAFSA as soon as October 1st. And so what this is, so that formula, or that form online, EFC Formula 2019, will walk you through everything. It's a 36-page document that will walk you through the entire formula. But I would also tell you, it's just as easy to go online and do it online, because then you can just plug in the numbers and it'll do the calculations behind the scenes for you. But I want you to understand how this works. And so what this is a calculation to say, let's look at everything. So parents' adjusted gross income is $130,000. They give you some allowances based on the income taxes that you paid, your Social Security, and something called an income protection allowance. Now, an income protection allowance is based solely on the size of the family and the number of students in school simultaneously. And so the idea here for a family of four, and I didn't even mention, this is the Griswold family, right? So Clark, Ellen, Audrey, and Rusty's getting ready to go off to college. And so for a family of four with one child in school, the allowance is $28,580. So the allowances, once we add that allowance to their taxes and their Social Security and everything else, we get about $65,000, leaving us with roughly $64,300 in terms of money that is left over. Then we look at assets. This family had $100,000 in assessable assets. And so, again, money in the bank, 529 plans, that sort of thing. You do have an asset allowance. Now, if you really understand this stuff and have seen it a time or two, what I will tell you is the biggest difference between the 2018 financial aid formula and the 2019 formula is this allowance. This number used to be about double. But now, I think largely because of the new higher standard deduction in the new tax code, they've dropped down the allowance that they allow you to keep in terms of assets. So this is based solely on the age of the older parent. So Mr. and Mrs. Client, if you waited a while to have kids, or if you married someone significantly older than you, this is where it starts to pay dividends. And so in this example, that asset allowance of $12,500 leaves them with $87,500. That then gets multiplied by a factor of 12%, giving them roughly $10,500. Add those two numbers together and you get that number, $74,700. Then just like on your taxes, you go to the bracket, and the bracket says if your number is $74,700, then the parent contribution is $9,097 plus 47% of the adjusted available income over $33,600. And that gives us a number of roughly $28,400. Okay, everybody memorize that entire formula? Again, you don't need to memorize it. I just want you to understand sort of the concept. We'll get out of the weeds here in a second, but I don't want everybody glazing over. I want you to understand it because it's going to be critically important here as we go along. So then we look at the student. Student earned $8,500. Well, the allowance is $6,660. When we take that number, add in the taxes, add in the Social Security paid, we get a total of $7,695 that had gone towards allowances, leaving them with $805. Okay, so now that gets multiplied by 50%, which gives us $403. Okay, then we look at the student's asset. Rusty has $15,000 in his name. There's no allowance. Every single dime counts against him, and it counts at a rate of 20%. So that's $3,000. So for the student contribution, again, we get to roughly $3,400 there. We add that to the parent contribution of $28,400 to get to a net expected family contribution of $31,800 and something. I can't see that number on the screen. I guess it's 862. I think is my number, right? Yeah, 31,862. I should have been able to do that math. 31,862. So what that is, draw the line in the sand. Think about your state, and I'm in Virginia, so I'll use that as an example. So for this family, if they went to the University of Virginia, which let's just say is $30,000 a year, the line in the sand, their expected family contribution is $31,862. So in other words, if the cost of attendance is $30,000, they're not eligible for need-based aid. However, if that same family was sending their child to the University of Richmond, which is closer to $70,000 a year, now all of a sudden they're eligible for roughly $40,000 of need-based aid. So if you're in California, take UCLA and USC. Take, if you're in Georgia, maybe you take a school like University of Georgia and compare that to Emory. I mean, just look at those examples because, again, there's so many misperceptions out there. I hear families that say, well, I'm never going to qualify for need-based aid. Well, how do you know that? Or I hear families that say, yeah, just the other day, by the way, a woman who works on my team went to a college fair the other day, and she says, well, we talked to School X, and they told us that, all about the scholarships and all the money that is available. And I said to her, yeah, but that's not for you. The reality is you're not going to get that money because you're not eligible for need-based aid. And so she quickly asked me to start paying her less money so that she could qualify for more need-based aid. But maybe that's wishful thinking on my part. Anyway, you get the idea. So, and we will certainly open it up for discussion and questions later on. So if you've got any questions on that, please just write them down or commit them to memory. Or I think you're able to put them online here, and we'll get them answered as we go. So does everybody feel like they've got a reasonably good handle on the EFC calculation? Hopefully so. I guess I get no feedback on this. So before we move forward, you got to understand there's really two paths. And by drawing that line in the sand, what we've identified is that for some families, they will be eligible for need-based aid. And for those families, we want to show them how to legally, morally, and ethically maximize their need-based eligibility. And then secondly, we're going to figure out that for some families, they're never going to be eligible for need-based aid. And so that's okay. We just need to create liquidity, cash flow, etc. So really, it's now taking these families and walking them down both of these paths. So the question becomes very frequently, parents say to me, Brock, my kids can go to any school they want as long as it's an in-state public school. And so this was an example of a family with whom we worked a few years ago. I've actually updated the numbers to make them current, but just so you understand them here, the school on the left is a public university. The cost of attendance was $24,000 and change. The family's expected family contribution was $15,000, making them eligible for a little over $9,000 of aid. The school on the right was almost $68,000, but the expected family contribution was the same, making them eligible for over $52,000, almost $53,000 of need-based aid. But here's the big difference. The school on the left only meets 65% of need. What that means is they don't care where the other 35% comes from, but they're not providing it. The school on the right, on the other hand, provides 100% of need. And if you follow down that a little bit further, they give that 88% is in the form of gift aid, money that never needs to be repaid. Whereas on the flip side, the school on the left, the public university, only 55% of this is gift aid, meaning that 45% is self-help, which is loans or work study. So the school on the left, the out-of-pocket cost is their $15,000 expected family contribution, plus the 35% that's not covered by the school, and then we add back in the self-help, to get to a net price of $20,937. Now, the school on the right, the out-of-pocket cost is the $15,000 expected family contribution. We add back in the self-help, which in this case, that was a $5,500 Stafford loan, plus a, whatever that number is, $850 student loan. So pretty minimal. They were able to get both of those loans very easily, but the net price is $21,348. Now you may look at that and say, Brock, for a financial advisor, you're not so great at math. But the reality is we just took a school that on paper was roughly triple the cost of the in-state school and made it roughly the same price. I mean, within about $400 difference. And so now you get a peek behind the curtain, because if you remember that $1.7 billion that Grinnell has in their endowment and 1,700 students, Grinnell is the type of school that has money and that gives money. Again, I would encourage you to find your Grinnell. Figure out those schools. If you can qualify for need-based aid, either because of, if you can qualify for aid, either because it's need-based or it's merit-based, that's other people's money, which is a very, very beautiful thing. So then the question becomes, okay, Brock, that's all fine and well, but I've got really good clients and they make pretty good money. They're never going to qualify for need-based aid. Well, understand that it's not just about qualifying for need-based aid. It's also about trying to figure out strategies for creating more cash flow, efficiency, liquidity, etc. So things to think about. Are your clients carrying a lot of non-deductible debt? I'll give you a great example of this. I met, this is maybe 3 weeks ago, but I met with a client. They were putting $42,000 a year aside for retirement plans. They had well-funded retirement plans. Retirement looked great. College looked miserable. Right? They had 3 kids. They were trying to figure out how to pay for their children's college education and just didn't have much liquidity. Again, retirement looked great. Now, the other thing that they had that didn't look so great is they had about $37,000 of credit card debt at an average interest rate of 16.74%. And I asked what I thought was a pretty simple question. I said, are you earning 16.74% on your retirement plans? And the father's response was, well, yeah, actually 2 years ago I did. I said, well, yeah, but long term, you're probably not. Is that fair? He said, yeah. I said, then I'm going to give you the advice that most advisors won't give you, and that is stop funding your retirement plan over and above the corporate match. In other words, fund it up to the match, but anything over and above that, we're going to try to slim that back a little bit until we get the debt paid off. Because when you're debt-free, you're powerful. And so the idea is that we're going to get that debt paid off in roughly a year, and then we're going to revisit it. We might start putting money back into the 401k. We might look at other strategies that could make sense as well. And I'm going to show you an example of that here in a second. Could you increase your cash flow? A lot of times parents say, well, Brock, if I could increase my cash flow, I wouldn't be hanging out at your seminar. But the reality is a lot of times it's right under their noses and they don't realize it. What role do taxes play on your investments? And I just do a little game to walk people through sort of the impact of taxes and fees and that sort of thing. And I really get on their side of the table because I explain, look, if you're not looking out for taxes and fees and some of the misperceptions that exist in the investment world, you're not really thinking holistically about this. Business owners, I literally came from a meeting here talking to a couple. They're both entrepreneurs, and they talked about how they could hire their children in the business in order to shift income from their 40% tax bracket down to the children's basically 0% tax bracket. So think about it. Let's say that the parents hire the kids, they pay them $15,000 a year, 2 kids, that's $30,000 that they've shifted from being taxed at 40% to being taxed at 0%. As a result, we just saved $12,000 a year in taxes. And we do that, let's say we do that for 4 years of high school and 4 years of college. That's $96,000 that we save over that time period. That's basically the equivalent of paying for an in-state public cost of attendance. So just different strategies. A lot of times we work with families that own businesses and their kids are working in their business. They're just not being paid. So some things to think about. What if you could delay paying for college for another 4 years? I call that the found opportunity cost. All I'm talking about there is just historically low interest rates and being able to borrow the money, again, from a Sally Mae or whomever, and allowing your money to stay invested. Now, for some families, that would scare the heck out of them. And if that's your client, that's probably not a great strategy, but it's something to think about. Now, to sort of wrap things up, and then I'm going to give you a case study, where do most families have most of their money? And what I do in our workshops is I have, at this point, everybody's a little tired. I have everybody stand up. And I say, I'm going to read to you some characteristics about an investment. And all I want you to do is just sit down when you no longer like the investment. And so you're making monthly contributions into this investment. All deposits are not safe from loss of principal. The customer can pay more than the minimum monthly payment, but not less. If the customer attempts to pay less, the financial institution keeps all previous contributions. Each contribution made to the account is illiquid and results in less safety and increased tax liability. The money in the account earns a whopping 0% rate of return. And last but not least, when the plan is fully funded, there's no income paid out. Now let that settle in a little bit. And for those of you who have been doing this for a while or have been exposed to the same type of philosophies that I have, you probably know exactly what this is. Some of you may be a little foreign. Oftentimes in my workshop, when I say, what is this? Somebody will say, that sounds a lot like my 17-year-old kid. That's not exactly what this is, but you're not far off. What I'm talking about specifically is your mortgage, or even more specifically, prepaying your mortgage. You know, paying extra principal each month or each year on your mortgage. And I always refer to, some of you know the book Misfortune 101 by a gentleman by the name of Doug Andrew. And just real quickly, because I'm a little short on time, his story is this. He and his wife bought a home in the mid-90s. They paid $500,000 for this home. They put 30% down. So they owed $350,000. They did a 15-year fixed mortgage, and they paid biweekly. So every 2 weeks they were making a mortgage payment. If Doug got a little bonus from work, they put a little extra money against their mortgage. The goal was to own this home free and clear in roughly 10 years. And they were doing great. But about 6 years into it, Doug lost his job. So they went to the bank and they said, hey, bank, we're way ahead on our amortization. Can we get some of that money back? What do you suppose the bank said? They said, all right, well then, again, we're way ahead on the amortization. I guess we're going to need to take the next 3, maybe 6 months off and just not pay the mortgage. They said, can't do that either. They said, well then, I guess what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to refinance the mortgage. They said, Doug, we'd love to help you. You've been a customer of our bank for 20 years, but you don't have a job. 3 months later, the bank foreclosed on that property. Now, the silver lining of this story is that that house that they originally purchased for $500,000 was now worth about $750,000. That mortgage that was originally $350,000 was now about $200,000. So they owed $200,000 on a $750,000 property. When the bank foreclosed on that property, what do you suppose they sold it for? The answer is around $600,000. So the bottom line on that is Doug started scratching his head. He said, I just lost $150,000 like that simply because I couldn't make my next, $2,000 mortgage payment. And he said, I did what I always thought was right. I thought being debt-free was a good objective. He said, what I should have done is I should have taken that money and put it into some safe, liquid, interest-bearing side account so that if I built up enough money in that side account, if I wanted to, I could pay off the mortgage. But if I ran into an emergency, I had more flexibility. And understanding the mortgage interest deduction, which has obviously changed since that time. But, for many families, it is kind of that last big tax deduction. I realize I've got an error. I didn't change this slide on this slide deck. It should be maximum tax deduction is $750,000, which is that change. And then the last thing is this. I call it the qualified plan problem. And if anybody's been exposed to the LEAP process, you're very familiar with this. I've used it in the past. I don't use it currently, but I think the economics of it make a lot of sense. What used to be that you went and you worked for a company for 40 years, and you got a gold pocket watch and you got a pension when you retired. And when ERISA was created, all the rules changed, right? It said instead of having a defined benefit plan, you'll have a defined contribution plan. And it looks something like this. Let's say you're 47 years old. You're going to work until you're 67. You're going to live until you're 90. We actually have a crystal ball at my office that allows us to see that. You got $100,000 in what I call old money, money that's already inside the plan. You're deferring $10,000 per year. Your very benevolent employer is giving you $3,000 in matching contributions, and you will earn 8% on your money. So let's see how it plays out. The $100,000 growing at 8% from 47 to 67 grows to $466,000. The $10,000 that you're deferring from age 47 to 67 grows to $494. The $3,000 grows to $148. And we add it all up, we get $1.1 million. So now you're at the top of the mountain, the day of financial independence, the day when you're getting ready to retire. And now we're going to start unwinding all of those accumulated savings. Well, the good news is that we know exactly how long you're going to live, and we know exactly what rate of return you're going to earn, which makes financial planning super easy. So on that $1.1 million, continuing to grow at 8%, we can pull out $97,493 per year. But what have you not done on that money? Haven't paid taxes. And so if you're in the federal tax bracket of 22%, you got to pay that. The average state income tax of 6%, that leaves you with roughly $74,000 per year. Now, I look at that and I say, gosh, we just paid, $70,195. We just paid $27,000 in state and federal income taxes. And my response to that is something like that. Now, the reality is, even if this is your client's exact same situation, they may not be in the 22% tax bracket today. And the reality is because every single one of them has at least one beautiful young tax deduction living under their roof, right? They've got mortgage interest that they're able to deduct. They're putting money into their retirement plans. And if they own a business, they've got business deductions. If they fast forward to 67, 73, 82 years old, where are the kids? Well, reality is the kids might be living on their couch in the basement, but they can't deduct them. They're not contributing to their 401ks. They paid the house way down or paid off. And last but not least, if they own a business, all the business deductions are gone because hopefully they sold the business for lots of money. So the question is, so what? What if you could put this money into some instrument that allows you to pull the money out on the back end tax-free? Doesn't that make more sense? And unfortunately, the reality is the IRS is a step ahead of us, right? There aren't a whole lot of instruments that allow for tax-deferred accumulation and tax-free withdrawals, but there are a few. Things like Section 529 plans, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, municipal bonds, and cash value life insurance. And again, you can see all of the various characteristics there as well. The downside of 529s, I said earlier, great tool, not necessarily a strategy, right? They go up, they go down, and obviously the compound interest is critical. Okay, this is, if anybody's using wealth building cornerstones, it's a great tool, sort of similar to the LEAP system, but maybe a little more visual, a little more conceptually easy to understand. But we all know about the compound yield curve. And what you'll see here is that the numbers get bigger and bigger the closer you get to the end, meaning most of the growth occurs at the end of the tail. Now, the problem with paying for college is that you've got to start over. Meaning when the child turns 18, you've been saving and saving and saving, but you got to pull the money out. And so what you avoid is all this, the gap, right? It makes an enormous difference if you don't have to start over. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can do that using cash value life insurance. And so this is a real quick case study. I know we're running over a few minutes. I'll probably be done in 4 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I apologize. If you do need to bounce, this is recorded, and Brendan will be sending it out. So we'll make sure I understand if people do have to get to another meeting. I'm going to hopefully make this big crescendo for you here and have it hit home. So the question is, and I got this. Some of you know John Wheeler, who's a NAIFA trustee. This is the question that he posed to me. How would you like to pay for all or part of college and get all or part of your money back? And this is a real life case study that we did a few years ago. So this was a male, 40 years old, ultra preferred rates. Aren't they all ultra preferred? Newborn child. And so he came to me and he said, hey, I'm looking at options. What do I do? We identified roughly $14,000 that could be redeployed into other instruments. And so what we did is we took that $14,000 and we paid it into a 10-pay life insurance policy. So this is a Mass Mutual 10-pay, $14,000 a year for 10 years. Okay? It gave us roughly a $400,000 death benefit and the waiver of premium feature. Okay, so in the event of disability, it's a self-completing plan. In year 10, they put in $140,000, and they've got roughly $150,000 of cash value at year 10. Well, I look at that and say, cash on cash, and the investment-minded consumer might say, well, that's not a real good rate of return on my money. I could do better in the 529 plan. And I don't disagree with you at year 10 that might be true. You can also lose a lot of money in the 529 plan, but that's a different conversation. That's a different webinar. The idea here is between years 11 and 18, you're done paying. You couldn't put more money into this 10-pay life insurance policy even if you wanted to. So maybe a strategy is in those years, keep saving the $14,000, but maybe you put those into the 529 plan. And then that way, if the market is doing well when the child is in college, you pull from the 529 plan. If the market's not doing well while the child's in school, you've got a different bucket of money that's not correlated to the market from which to take your distributions. Worst case scenario, what I illustrated for this client is that when his son turns 18, during that 4-year period, and we all agreed that his son was going to graduate in 4 years, he can pull out $63,000 tax-free from the cash value of the life insurance. And again, what I wanted to do is show him sort of worst case scenario, never repaying a loan, right? Didn't pay any of it back ever. And then at life expectancy, there's a $310,000 tax-free death benefit. So let me do the math for you. They put in $140,000. When the child went off to school, they pulled out roughly $252,000. And then at life expectancy, there's a $310,000 death benefit. See, the problem inherent to 529 plans is once you spend the money, it's gone. Once you pull the money out and send it to Georgetown or UCLA or Notre Dame or Florida, you've spent the money and you're never recapturing it again. You've sent it off to the college and they're going to use it to build up their coffers and be able to give it to other students and that type of thing. With the cash value life insurance, you can use it over and over and over and over again. The final analysis is this. With Section 529 plans, as the money is spent, it can't continue to earn. It's reliant on market performance. Once it is spent, it's gone forever. Whereas with student loans, you've got to pay back with interest. With the life insurance strategy, you've got protection against death, disability. You could also have long-term care benefits in there. It's guaranteed to grow every year. This is a whole life chassis. I like that because I like the idea of balancing it with maybe market centered instruments. Certainly you could do the same type of things with VUL or UL or IUL and, different flavors, same concept. Cash can grow even while loaned. There's no stock market risk. It helps people to kind of tame the bear market and can also be used for expenses not covered by 529 plans. So let's say your child goes to school across the country, paying for those plane tickets, that type of thing. And again, John Wheeler's language was, do you eat the chicken or do you eat the eggs, right? With the life insurance, you're eating the eggs. With the 529 plan, you're eating the chicken. So the last thing I would say is don't plan in a vacuum. You don't go out to somebody and say, hey, you need to fund your kid's college education. You need to buy more life insurance. The concept here is looking at it comprehensively and understanding all the moving parts and how you can utilize a tremendous instrument called permanent life insurance to be able to not only answer some basic financial planning needs, but also to be able to pay for college and education. What I would tell you is don't misrepresent what our products can and cannot do. I see people all the time, they say, put more money into life insurance and annuities to reduce your expected family contribution. And while that logic is true, you've got to also understand by drawing that line in the sand, what is their expected family contribution? If you've got somebody with one child in school who has an expected family contribution of $100,000, even if you shift all their assets, they're probably not going to be able to shift enough money to be able to qualify for much, if any, need-based aid. For more information, you can feel free to reach out to us. The website's probably the easiest. Again, our website is changing within the next couple of weeks, but thecollegefundingcoach.org. And you can always reach out to Brendan or anyone at NAIFA. I think they know how to track me down. And for better or worse, there aren't too many Brock Jollies out there out in the world. So if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to call or email. I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, just like I'm passionate about NAIFA and love talking about it. So happy to help if anybody does have further questions.
And I'm the only Brendan here, too, so I'll track him down if need be. Outstanding. We do have a few questions, and so we'll go ahead and get to those. Explain what happens if the parent owns the life insurance versus an adult child owning the life insurance policy.
Yeah, so what I do, again, looking at it comprehensively, is first and foremost, I want to make sure that the parents are adequately insured for life insurance, right? Obviously, there's some exceptions to that if we can't get life insurance on the parents, or, certainly there's lots of, extenuating circumstances. But the idea here would be pretty basic. If the child dies, while tragic, I don't have a college funding problem. If the parent dies, also tragic, I have a major college funding problem. And so I'm always going to insure the parents first. Now, I told you I came from these clients of mine who have 2 young daughters, and we're setting up life insurance. They've already got life insurance on mom and dad. We're setting up life insurance on the kids because they said, hey, I wish my parents had done this for me. And now, who knows what we'll do, whether we use the kids' policies or the parents' policies, but now we've got flexibility. I've been working with this family now for, I think, about 9 years. So this is just this is the next phase of what we're doing. But generally, I'm insuring the parents first in that process.
We've had a number of questions about access to the PowerPoint slides, and I'll let you know that this webinar will be made available. There'll be a web link emailed to all of the registrants, and you'll be able to view the slides as often as you like through that video, and press pause as well as you go through it. What options are there for clients with kids going to college in 3 years?
Yeah, it's that's the industry calls that late stage college funding, and the strategies are just a little bit different. I mean, you can do the same type of things. Again, I would start by drawing the line in the sand. Are they eligible for need-based aid? If the answer to that is yes, then we want to show them how to maximize their need-based aid eligibility. So that's where you might use, again, things that don't count: retirement plans, equity in a home, cash value inside of life insurance or annuities. So there are life insurance products out there. Just off the top of my head, I know MetLife has one, Mutual Trust. There's a few others that have products that are specifically designed as single premium life insurance policies. And then certainly there are other annuity products where if you've got a big lump sum, you can dump it. The thing that you can't change generally is you can't change someone's income. If you're self-employed, there are some strategies out there, but I was sort of joking about my employee, right? She's not going to come in and say, hey, I'm just going to send my daughter to college in 2 years. Could you reduce my income so I can qualify for more need-based aid? That's just totally counterintuitive. But draw that line in the sand first. Do their expected family contribution, and then from that, you'll be able to determine will they be eligible for need-based aid or not.
Will those outside of Virginia be able to get CE for this webinar? I will answer that one. There are a number of states in addition to Virginia for which CE credits are approved. Montana, Illinois, and Louisiana come to mind, among others. If you're in one of the states that is approved, either I will be in touch with you or your state exec will be in touch with you so you can get CE credit for participating today. If you have $80,000 total planned for $20,000 to use for the next 4 years starting next year, what would you recommend it should be placed in?
Oh, God, that's sort of the silver
and that's
bullet.
an or. That's actually, it says 4, but it's or there, Brock, 80,000 or 20,000.
If you have 80,000 total planned for... Yeah, I mean, I don't fully understand the question there, Rhonda. I'm happy to talk with you offline about it if you want to reach out to me, but if I'm understanding it correctly, I mean, it's sort of the silver bullet question, and that would get into risk tolerance, time horizon, where the kids go into school, and really customizing the solution there. What I would suggest is, look, I still love 529 plans. If they're going to qualify for need-based aid, then I would maybe look at putting that into an annuity or a single premium life insurance policy. It's just different things that you could do with it. Too many variables really that I just don't know, and obviously you can't include in a short GoToWebinar question form. But Rhonda, feel free to reach out to me if you want more specifics on that, and I'm happy to talk about the case. If you have less than, okay. Which one?
Are PUAs ever utilized in a whole life policy?
Yes. So paid up additions, or some companies, additional life insurance rider or whatever it is, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll sort of overfund a life insurance policy. So in other words, the concept is, I always say when you think of most kinds of insurance, you want to pay as little as possible for as much benefit as possible. And with this, you're actually looking at it, in many cases, you want to put as much into it as possible, more often than not trying to avoid a modified endowment contract, but putting right up to that limit in without going over, so that you can sort of maximize the cash value accumulation, especially if the goal is to be able to use that money to pay for their children's college education.
And a comment that this is also approved for CE in Arizona. That is absolutely correct. Thank you for that addition. And we have time for one more question. What do you tell people who already have their first in college, have not prepared with these strategies, and now want a strategy for current student and upcoming siblings?
I tell them good luck. No, I think the real answer there is, I had a former managing partner who said, look, if today was the best day if yesterday was the best day to plant a tree, then today is the second best day, right? Meaning it's never too late. So you can always create strategies that'll create more efficiency, more effectiveness, that type of thing. And the key is, don't put your head in the sand and cross your fingers and hope it works out. The key is to do something.
And I said one more question, I lied. We'll add one more. We'll ask Brock to work a little more overtime. Are paid up additions typically used for college funding purposes and whole life policies in your experience?
Yes, I mean, that's sort of the same type of question. Yeah, I would do that. So, the same question here. You advise doing max. Ryan, the answer on that is generally, again, a lot of variables on here. So it sort of depends. It depends on, what rate class the client gets. This is sort of the art and the science of not only financial planning, but college funding, and trying to figure out that right mix. But oftentimes we will use something, adding paid up additions to get sort of as close to that MEC limit as possible. Somebody said, who should own it? Generally, it's the parents. Life policy ownership. Does life policy ownership affect the needs-based qualifications? Generally, no. That said, remember there's 229 CSS profile schools. They could ask about it, right? That's an asset that could be included at those schools. Not always, but it certainly could be.
And as we wrap up, we see that someone would like us to show the good investment game slide one more time. So we will close by going back to that good investment game slide. So if you'll bear with us, we'll go ahead and get back there.
That's it.
All right, and we do have the good investment game slide back on the screen, and so we will go ahead and show that as we close out here. And I want to thank Brock Jolly for his outstanding presentation, crammed with extraordinarily valuable information. As one of our participants said, best hour they've ever spent, or best hour and 15 minutes. So thank you so much for that, Brock. And thank you to all of our NAFA member participants for taking time out of your schedules to learn more about this vital topic. This concludes the NAFA webinar.